My question is directed to the Minister of Defence. I understand, sir, there was an announcement made of the deployment of SAF troops to Iraq. I have four questions in that regard. Firstly, what is MINDEF's assessment of the threat to our troops there? And secondly, in view of the inherent instability in Iraq, and of particular concern being sectarian conflict between Sunnis and Shias, in addition to the presence of ISIS and its other various incarnations, what is being done to prepare servicemen and their families for the deployment? Thirdly, how long does the ministry envisage the deployment to last, and what is the SAF's mission and its objectives with respect to this deployment? And is MINDEF concerned about the prospect of mission creep? Fourthly, and this is the final question, Singapore deployed about 470 servicemen to Afghanistan from 2007 to 2013, and they assisted the Afghan National Army in artillery training, IED detection, construction, and imagery analysis. Can the Minister share more details on the size and nature of our deployment to Iraq, what tasks our troops will undertake, and what and whose resources they can call upon to ensure their security there? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, those were good questions and very, very relevant ones. What's our threat assessment when we send SAF troops to missions? You must never be prepared to send people if you think there are no risk, because there are always risks. And you only send them when the risks are necessary to protect Singaporeans and Singapore. So whether we send them to Afghanistan, whether we send them to Iraq, whether we send them to the Gulf of Aden, even when we send them to Timor-Leste for peacekeeping operations, you have casualties in peacekeeping operations. You do this because at the core, you're protecting Singapore's interests. So in Afghanistan, we understood that if we did not deal with terrorism at its source, because that's where Al-Qaeda influence was the greatest, you basically are just responding to waves and waves of terrorists that are being radicalized, they are being trained, that are being exported from ground zero, as it were. And it worked. The 10 years they were in Afghanistan, Mr. Pritam Singh recollected accurately. The imagery analysts, whether it was weapons locating radar, we made a contribution. We identified even hotspots for the coalition. And the terrorist threat dissipated for now, I said for now, because we are keeping a watch on Al-Qaeda cells, and there's every possibility that there can be resurgence. Against ISIS, we've made significant progress. I think just 2 or even 3 years ago, if you just look at the geographical map, the areas in which ISIS strongholds control was a majority of Iraq and Syria. But now it's shrunk to the few last strongholds, if any, but the numbers are much small. So we've made progress. How do we prepare servicemen for these threats? Our SAF personnel who go there recognize that these are threats, but we systemically identify the threat. So for each mission, we'll have a needs and threat assessment team that go down to the ground, that speak to the commanders, that map the terrain, that map the risk. And they'll come with an assessment. And then not only the elements that are required to fulfill the operations, and we'll talk about that because you asked for it, but the protection that is necessary. You can minimize it, but you can never completely eliminate it. How long will it last? For Afghanistan, it lasted 10 years, our deployment. Against ISIS, it's been relatively short, I think since 2014, shorter. But for us to not continue to contribute when the most significant gains have been in actually taking back Iraq, I think it's not within our character, not within our mission imperative. There is no mission creep. The central mission is so that ground zero for the export of terrorists must be eliminated, as we did in Afghanistan. Just imagine if we said, well, the rest of the world can go about it, but we don't worry about Afghanistan. If the problems there gain in momentum, we'll suffer. For Iraq, for ISIS, we had a much more vested interest because there were foreign fighters from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from Singapore who were there. So there is no mission creep. It's very clear. It's to help now. It's shifted to another phase. The first phase was actually the most difficult, to recover territory, to rid ISIS of the resources, of the ability to increase their resources to export terrorism. And while our chaps were there, we were very useful. Our imagery analyst teams, you asked what they were deployed there for, identified financial strongholds that ISIS troops had been using and helped the coalition eliminate these, if you like, financial warehouses. We are now deployed with other troops, the Australians, some other troops, which they are joint protection, and we can call on them. But there is a cap security. I visited our troops last year and was satisfied that, to the extent possible, that there is out perimeter protection, that if an event of incident, there will be measures to respond to that. In fact, when I was there, it was just so happened that they were responding in a simulated scenario to an attack. And Americans were there, the Australians there, our chaps were there, and they mobilized for hospitals and then for how to guard the vicinity. I think that's about as much as I can say for all the questions, but let me just summarize. We understand what this missions is about. We have to keep terrorism at bay. We have to keep at it. This is a long battle. We dealt with the threat after 9/11, Bali bomb blast, and joined other forces in Afghanistan. With ISIS, we are now in Iraq. When will it end? When can we pull back? I don't know. Somebody said communism without the divine intervention, without God, took 50 years.